Good morning. I'm Kurt Thompson, your 2020 president of the Massachusetts Association of Realtors. I'm actually absolutely excited to be continuing our conversation this morning, and we have a wonderful keynote speaker for you, Ryan Wynett, which I'll be introducing to you shortly. Very much we've talked over the last couple of weeks and months as we have all of these things circling in the news cycle, and we're seeing an incredible outcry and discussion in terms of what's happening with equality and disparagement within the United States. I've always said that if we are not intentionally inclusive, then we are unintentionally exclusive. And what we're going to be talking about today is the specific topic of implicit bias. And Ryan's going to be going very deep into that a little bit later on this morning. Also on the call, we have a fantastic panel of top realtors from all around the state of Massachusetts. They're going to be sharing their thoughts, their insights, and answering questions as we go into those conversations. NAR has said that this is our lane. Dealing with these issues, we are uniquely positioned as realtors to deal with fair housing issues and dealing with inequity, and we have the ability and the responsibility to nurture those conversations and to take action wherever possible. On your panel today, you have an incredible group of real estate professionals, realtor leaders from all over the state. Realtors that not only have incredible business success, but also are committed to the realtor organization and our institute, societies, and councils, and have a history of providing exceptional service and benefit to members and to buyers and sellers across the Commonwealth. With us today, we have MAR CEO, Teresa Hatton, outstanding CEO, leader, forward thinker, and visionary of the Massachusetts Association of Realtors. We also have David McCarthy, operating partner and broker with Keller Williams Realty, Boston Metro West in Boston. David was the 2015 president of the Greater Boston Association of Realtors and is the 2020 Realtor of the Year for the Greater Boston Association of Realtors. We also have with us Allison Socha. She's the team leader with Linda O and Allison Group at Leading Edge Real Estate in Melrose. Allison is the Massachusetts governor of the Women's Council of Realtors. And little known fact, she was her high school valedictorian and the Cardinal Madero Scholar at Boston University. Super smart. We also have joining us Nellie Soto. Nellie is a broker with Century 21 Northeast in Salem, New Hampshire. She was the founder of NAREP, which is the National Association of Hispanic Real Estate Professionals here in Massachusetts, and has had an incredible impact with providing realtors opportunities, education, professionalism, and expanding opportunities for realtors and practitioners across Massachusetts. We also have our distinguished past president, Paul Yorkis, president of Patriot Real Estate, Inc. in Medway, Massachusetts. Paul was the 2017 president of the Massachusetts Association of Realtors, and it was really under his leadership as president that MAR began focusing on diversity and inclusion. He initiated the processes and the systems that gave us stronger relationships with our institutes and societies and councils like ARIA and NAREP, and really help focus the Massachusetts Association of Realtors on diversity. And finally, our keynote speaker. Today we have Ryan Wynett. He has a PhD in cognitive science and is the exhibit manager of the National Underground Railroad Freedom Center. A little bit of information on Ryan. After graduating from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign in 2007 with a degree in communications, Ryan Wynett spent the better part of the next decade fighting out the kinds of things he was not very good at. This includes 2 years contributing to a pair of self-help books rooted in cognitive and evolutionary biology. You, Staying Young, and You. Having a Baby from 2008 to 2011. Ryan worked for the New York consulting practice in Manhattan, Manhattan, where he focused primarily on preserving the life and furthering the legacy of the late management theorist Peter F. Drucker. He then spent 3 years in Austin pursuing a PhD in cognitive psychology at the University of Texas before realizing how miserable it was making him. Dropping out and moving back home to Cincinnati in 2014, he joined the Freedom Center team a year later and is currently the manager of implementing bias initiatives at the museum. We've had the opportunity to talk with Ryan a couple times now. He is an extremely impressive individual, and he's going to lead us on a very important conversation this morning. And with that, Ryan, I'd like to kick the conversation over to you, sir.
All right. Well, thank you, Kurt. I'm glad that got cleared up because I couldn't have in good conscience gone through the thing having you think I'm a PhD. I now look at it like a successful failure, which is also what they called Apollo 13. But it's a good segue because a lot of what we're going to be doing is still grounded in what I loved about cognitive science, which is just how fascinating it is, how much it applies to our life. My advisor realized I wasn't going to finish before I did, and he said, listen, it's really important to figure out what you don't want to do in life, make it part of the story. So I moved back home, and well, you know what, I'll get into that. So today we're going to be talking about bias, we're going to be talking about the brain, we're going to also be talking about blind spots. That's kind of what today is about. Just take a second to absorb this cartoon, for which I paid $25 to use the rights in a PowerPoint a couple years ago, and it's been well worth it. He doesn't know that, that horn's not part of the equation. I found that people tend to think they can see their blind spots, that they're impervious to them. But the reality is, like, if we could see them, they wouldn't be called blind spots. So here's just one example that I find useful. Think of this as a billboard ad on the side of the road. This was pitched by Coca-Cola to be on the side of the road in Dubai. And the people in Dubai immediately rejected this out of hand. Take a couple seconds and think about some of the answers that you might be coming up with about why this wouldn't work in Dubai. I hear because Dubai is more than sand. He's white. He's wearing he's using his left hand. He's in shorts. It's confusing with the animation in the real life. I think most people would agree at a basic level, what Coca-Cola was going for here in the storyboard was you're really thirsty and tired, you drink Coke, and then you're no longer thirsty and tired. And that might work a lot of places. Where it didn't work is Dubai, where they read right to left. So you're running through the desert, you drink the Coke, you die. You think this is a very effective way to sell Coca-Cola? No, or any beverage. And I bet a lot of people out there know that not only Arabic, but Hebrew throughout the Middle East is read right to left. But it turns out very few people, in my experience, have that come up top of mind, because our reactions to the world are a product of our experiences in the world. This thing always reminds me of like the cultural incompetency of when Chevy came out with the Nova in Mexico, and Nova in Spanish means no go, do some homework. So like Kurt was saying, I work at the National Underground Railroad Freedom Center on the banks of the Ohio. And the Freedom Center has always been in the business of trying to fight discrimination, to overcome discrimination. And so we talk about everything from the Underground Railroad era in the United States. This is a slave pen. Please underline twice, not slave quarters. This is a pen. So this is a warehouse for storing recently captured people from around the Ohio River Valley, and they would be stored here for anywhere from 10 to 40 people in here for days or weeks before being ultimately marched down to Mississippi and sold into the slave trade. We talk about the Civil Rights era. We have a virtual reality experience where you, to as much as it's possible, put yourself into the perspective of Rosa Parks those years ago on that bus and try to get a feel for what she felt. We also have I believe the world's only permanent exhibition that keeps getting updated about modern day slavery, of which there are an estimated 30 million around the world, about half of those in Asia. So all these things fall under the same category of there's been this implicit idea out there in businesses like ours that if we just slowly and surely make our way up this very, granted steep hill, that eventually we'll get here. And once we get here, discrimination will be a thing of the past. But what we're learning more and more is that what was once just viewed as the tip of the iceberg is now more like, or what was once an uphill battle is more like just the tip of the iceberg, because what is going on beneath the surface, outside of our conscious awareness and often control, is driving a lot of the problems that we still see in society day in, day out. So one of the quotes that kind of inspired me to kind of marry what I had learned in graduate school and growing up with a love of cognitive science with what the Freedom Center is doing is this. It's by a children's book author in the 1940s. And it says what it says: our freedom to be measured by the number of things we're able to walk away from. And I started thinking, what is somebody less capable of walking away from than my preconceived notions of who you already are? And so as a museum of conscience, the Freedom Center has a responsibility to try to fight discrimination with the best known methods and practices, which now includes the idea that not all discrimination is intentional. And at the end of the day, a lot of discrimination, almost by definition, has to be unintentional, because as we're going to talk about, virtually all thinking is unintentional. So it's important to get a grasp of this, maybe to go through some of the differences between implicit and explicit bias. So without going too deep, implicit bias happens beneath the surface. It's fast, it's reactionary. Explicit is conscious, you're doing it. I want to make it very clear. Implicit bias is not that you deep down know that you're an anti-Semite or homophobic or fill in the blank. You know. That's explicit. Okay, what we're talking about is kind of thinking of double secret bias. You don't know. So this is incredibly obvious. This is very conscious. It's based on the premise I don't like a group of people because they're a different color, and therefore I create a separate bathroom. Unintentional forms of discrimination, because that's how I think of it. Explicit biases lead to intentional forms of discrimination. Implicit biases can lead to unintentional forms of discrimination, such as the next time you walk into a bathroom that has fixtures, automatic fixtures, either soap dispensers, paper towel dispensers, faucets, whatever, that were from the 90s and the early 2000s. What I started noticing at the Freedom Center is that on a given day, I'd walk into the bathroom, and although black and white people were doing the same things to try to get our faucets to turn on, the people of color were having a noticeably harder time getting these things to turn on, if they even would. And it turns out what's happening in a lot of these things is they use a near infrared light. And so when I put my white light hand out there, the invisible light bounces off my skin, it goes back to the thing, it completes the circuit, and that's how these things know when to turn on and off. If someone is dark enough, that light never bounces back because it's absorbed. And I gotta tell you, nobody thinks about this. I mean, I didn't, and the looks and the reactions I get from people of color when I talk about this are stunning, because all of a sudden 20 to 30 years of their bathroom life makes sense. Like, they're not crazy. And it becomes a really strong metaphor for everything else we're talking about today, which is, if I have never had a hard time washing my hands, why would I believe anybody else has? So this is from the Freedom Center's archives. It's from the late 1800s, I believe, and it's built it's Cook's soap, and it's built on the brand equity, our soap is so great, it will turn your black child white, versus Dove, which, despite what a lot of people seem to think, is not a Procter & Gamble product. It is a Unilever product, which is like their biggest competitor. And so what do you think certain people took issue with on this ad? Certain people, actually a lot of people, felt that this ad was trying to say that the product that they were selling was going to make you lighter or whiter and or thinner. Dove responded by saying they were trying to show the skin of anybody before and after the product, but good luck, that's not what it said to a lot of people. Again, this is from the 1940s. It's about as obvious as it gets. One of the most replicated studies in this area of psychology, which is called implicit social cognition, are these studies that have resumes that are identical, except for one thing. Not similar, identical. except that the name is either could be construed as stereotypically white or stereotypically black. And as you can see, on the one hand, the white sounding resumes are far more likely to get a callback. On the other hand, the black sounding resumes are far less likely to get a callback. I cannot tell you how many times, it's at least 100, that I've heard parents of color tell me that how much effort they went through to name their children whatever they named them. And the phrase that kept coming up again and again is, I wanted them to have a chance in a resume pile. Restaurants. This is from Georgia in the 1950s, white trade only. Philadelphia, just a couple years ago at a Starbucks, where these two young African-American gentlemen were waiting for the other member of their meeting before ordering anything. And in the meantime, asked to use the restroom. And as you can see, were shortly thereafter escorted out by the police in handcuffs. So we want white tenants in our white community. Again, this is explicit, it's obvious, it's overt. One of the first things I remember realizing in retrospect was implicit bias related was I remember when this tenured professor from Harvard, Henry Louis Gates, was arrested outside of his own home. That always stuck with me, and it made a lot more sense when I started doing this work a few years ago. All right, we'll do one more. This is from Selma, Alabama in 1931. It's made out of metal. There are holes to screw it into things. It's intentional. This comes from Denver, Colorado, just a few years ago. In 2014, it was done. It should be noted, not till 2016 was anything really noticed. And so the Red Cross has had versions of this poster going back decades. And the template, if you Google Red Cross pool safety poster, is very similar throughout the country because there's no national one, it's all regional. The difference is in a lot of these older ones, the people are exclusively white. My theory is whoever created this in Denver was not only not trying to be discriminatory, they walked away from this project thinking, nailed it, you know, job well done. And yet, if we really take a critical look at it, who are the first, or who are the only people that are labeled as what to emulate is the right thing? Who are the cool people? And they're the white people. And then starting with the kid going off the diving board, African-American, top left, Latino, black kid running, top right, Asian guy with a glass bottle, bottom right, black girl pushing somebody in. The middle, this kid looks like he's in trouble for drowning, you know, which to be fair is not cool, but I don't think that's what they were going for. So it's amazing if I throw this out into like middle schoolers that it can be a very diverse school and two people, black and white kids, can be very close friends. And it's fascinating to see the difference in where their heads are coming from in terms of whether or not the people that created this knew they were creating it. So bias in the brain. The human brain is very, very complicated. One of my favorite authors, Arthur Kessler, said the evolution of the human brain not only overshot the needs of prehistoric man, it is the only example of evolution giving a species an organ it does not know how to use. It is wildly complex. We just know it works. And so we also know that it's a huge energy hog. It's only 2% of your body weight, more or less, and about 20 to 25% of the calories every day are used to think. So we take a lot of shortcuts. And one of the big strategies that the brain developed early on is the way we do all this crazy stuff without even thinking about it is without even thinking about it, because about 95% of all cognition, every thought you've ever had, only 5% is above the surface. It is an unbreakable barrier. So that old, saying about, you only use 10% of your brain turns out to be pretty true, but because the other 90+% is busy keeping you alive. Bias is a necessary part. It's also a big strategy, because the simple answer is the reason we're biased is because it is too expensive metabolically to remain neutral. You cannot have to react from scratch all the time. And so we have biases. And it's important to understand, although it feels negative, it's got a heavy, heavy negative connotation. It's a neutral word. It comes from sewing, actually. It's French. It means slant. So any leaning, any oblique, any diagonal, right? That's all that bias is. And actually, and I'll be able to send this out after, this is called the Cognitive Bias Codex. It's been known for, I don't know how long, that there are 206 bones in the human body. There are at present about 195 proven cognitive biases. There are approaching more biases in the brain than there are bones in the body, and they play a very similar function, which is to support how we get through our daily lives. Implicit bias is just one of these, and we're really only talking about a couple of these. Most of these biases, these reactions we have, are about how we react with the world, objects in it, everything from why you see the Virgin Mary in toast and don't see it the 100,000 other times you make toast, to see things in clouds, et cetera, et cetera. And so, bias also has the function of showing us that rarely do people think of like that I'm a fan, like I'm a Reds fan, of bias toward. We think of them as preferences. And interestingly, I found out another recently that another French word, rivalry, comes from the idea of the relationship that happens when two people share the same river or brook. That's where rivalry comes from as an idea. And so, despite last year, I want the Cincinnati Bengals to win whenever they're playing anybody. I am biased toward them. On the flip side, I want the Pittsburgh Steelers to lose whenever they're playing anybody. I am biased against them. I could care less who is playing cricket in Australia today. I have no bias. I do not have an opinion. If Pete Rose is on your team, bowling over Ray Fosse in the 1970 World Series, it's great. And he's gritty. If he were on the other team, I think I would describe him as dirty. And so it's a matter of perspective. So what is implicit bias? I found that often it suffers from these kind of dry, academic, vague definitions where it can be defined as the attitudes or stereotypes that affect our actions, understanding, and decisions in an unconscious manner. But I found that this kind of thing pales in comparison to a practical demonstration. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to say a riddle as slowly as I can, because I always speed up on these things. But I'm going to say it twice. And then luckily, I think most people are on mute. But even if you're on mute, try not to blurt out answers just as an exercise, because the answer is not nearly as important as being able to make sure that everybody's going through the thought process. So I'll say it twice. I'll pause for 3 seconds and grab a drink of water, and then we'll go on. So all 7 of these ballet dancers are raising children, but only 5 are biological mothers to their children. Who could those other dancers be? How could they be raising children if they're not the biological mothers? So I'll repeat it, and keep in mind, nobody is together. So you got 7 dancers raising 7 children. All 7 are raising kids, 5 are the biological mom. So the other 2 aren't. Who could they be? If you're confused, adoption should be coming to mind. So take a couple seconds, think of as many answers as you can. Okay, so the answers I hear on a daily basis. The funny answer, which I did not come up with, is you could be lifting them in the air. So if anybody said that, pat yourself on the back. That's the funny answer. It's not wrong. Other answers include adoption, foster, surrogacy, step-parent, godparent, same-sex couple, takes a village. I'm sure a lot of you out there are thinking it could also be the father, and that's who they are. They're the biological dads. That's the reason they aren't the biological moms. And this is important. This is an iconic poster around Cincinnati. It's been around for 40 years. And we had a copy in my house growing up. I walked by it a million times, and not once did I mean, let alone think they were men. I never thought they were women. I knew they were women, because when I saw this years later, which is the photo shoot from that original poster, I was stunned. I was surprised. And surprise is a hallmark of having these types of heavily held, if not biases, heavily held implicit associations, because in order to be surprised that they're men, what must have I been thinking they were going to be? And I know on a conscious level that men dance the ballet. Ask me, sure, I've seen them. And yet, again and again and again. Now, the only people, about 1 out of every 20 people will say men, father, or dads. 1 out of about 1,000 people will point to this thing from 30 feet away and say, yellow and purple are men, here's why. And every single time, they are professional ballet dancers, and they're reacting to what? The shoes. It's an objective difference. The women all have satin toe shoes strapped on with ribbon, and the men have leather slippers that are strapped on with elastic. So it's not a riddle for those people. They know. In the absence of knowing, I'm guessing, and I'm guessing based on my strength of association. So getting back to the brain, throughout history, the brain, it has eluded every culture for forever. And through the years, the way that the brain has thought to work, it's been compared to the most advanced inventions across the globe and across time. Everything from the abacus to the water clock to the telephone switchboard. And today, the ringing analogy is a what? The brain works like a computer. And just like the most advanced computer, it doesn't always get it right. There's some kinks in the system. And people generally love this cartoon because people can generally empathize with this cartoon. Every single day, well, when I was back at the museum, we have these like beautiful 10-foot tall glass French doors leading in and out of the exhibit, and they have handles on both sides. So they pull from the outside when you're walking in, and on the inside, they have a handle because it's a fire code thing. What do you think 1 out of 3 people does, including myself sometimes, all the time? They yank on it, right? So Dr. Panaji is one of our collaborators and the co-inventor of the implicit association test, has this nice catch-all term for these things, mind bugs, which he describes as ingrained patterns of thought that lead to errors in how we perceive, remember, reason, and make decisions. They are beyond awareness and control. I agree with the control part mostly, but I'm going to try to make you a little bit more aware of them. People remember the dress from a few years ago. It's blue or black. It's yellow and or white and gold. It's not either or. It's both and. Believe it or not, the people that own the dress are friends of mine. They're husband and wife, and they're cognitive neuroscientists at NYU, and they bought that dress to study it a few years ago. They taught me this. So these are just coffee sleeves. Any 2 coffee sleeves that are the same is going to produce this effect. So which one of these looks wider? The bottom one, right? Okay, so I'm just going to flip this really quick. Okay, what about now? Is this still the bottom one? Okay, let's just double make sure. Now, so the important thing is I'm not tricking you. You're tricking you. And again, the reason this is working is most of the time when you're lining up things with a straight edge, it does make them equal because they'll have a 90-degree angle. These have curves, so they're never equal. And a lot of times our first reactions are not the right answer. Okay, on the count of 3, I want everybody to, as fast a pace as you can muster, read me the color of each of these words. Not what it says, the color, okay? So on the count of 3. 1, 2, 3, go. Orange, green, red, green, purple, blue, black, orange. Okay, I just can't see any of you, but I'm gonna take a guess. It's pretty early in the morning, so we're gonna do it one more time, as fast as you can. Ready? 1, 2, 3, go. Red, green, yellow, blue, orange, green, red, green, purple, blue, black, orange. Okay, not bad. Now, same thing, but just so we're clear, on the count of 3, color, not word. So the first 3 things are gonna be red, green, yellow. Power through. 1, 2, 3, go. Orange, green, red, green, purple, blue, black, orange. Most people are probably finishing up. It was probably remarkably harder. And the first one was remarkably easier. Why is the first one easier? Because the 2 things line up. Why is the second one harder? They don't. And so it takes a lot longer to make the same type of decision. This is called the Stroop effect. It's been around since 1930. And it shows that when things share a natural connection, color green, word green, it's effortless for us to make that leap. When they don't, it's not. And so it's just significantly harder. Now, if I ask you what group of people breeze equally fast through both of these conditions, a lot of people would probably think the colorblind. They do a lot worse overall. It is children that cannot read, really anybody that's illiterate, but children tend to wear it on their sleeve a lot more. And so they're just doing what they know how to do, which is tell me the colors. They have no clue what it actually says. So what do you see here? This is it's called a change in meaning illusion. It's been around for at least 150 years. You should be seeing a woman. The question is she on the younger side, like closer to like 25, or is she on the older side, closer to like 75? So a lot of people at first glance see the younger woman. She's looking off into the distance. If you see the younger woman, make, and only her, make the young woman's necklace the older woman's mouth. Some people are going, so, and some people are like, by the way, it's not there. They're both there. And we'll linger on it just to make sure. So the young woman's, which again looks like she could be in The Great Gatsby, versus the old woman who could be like Dr. Zhivago. The young woman's left ear is the old woman's left eye. And again, we can send this out later, but the important thing is both reactions are there, both are correct. And the really important reason is that I show this is the same brain processes that allowed us to do all that, fun brain game stuff also play an integral role in the ways that we view other people. This is Brian Stevenson. He's a prominent civil rights attorney. And I've heard him speak about being in a courtroom not too long ago, dressed in a suit as he is here. He's the only one in the room making notes at a table. And shortly after, a white judge walks in and immediately admonishes him for not having his lawyer present. So there are two fundamental ways, at least, that you could view a black man in a suit in a courtroom making notes at a table. He is the client waiting for the attorney. He's the attorney waiting for the client. And what is it about the experience of that judge, that made him have that reaction? Is he an outright racist? Is he a jerk to everybody? Is it the interplay of a lot of white attorneys, black defendants, both? Who knows? But something made him have this reaction. And these things happen all the time. So the other side of the Mind Bugs quote is it's not just about, fun, kitschy stuff in the world, coffee sleeves and such. Dr. Banaji describes implicit bias as mental stowaways taking root in our brains, tugging us in favor of white over black, straight over gay, male over female, and impacting everything from hiring decisions to how doctors mete out medical care and judges pass sentence. After Hurricane Katrina, which I can't believe it, is 15 years ago this week, and now with that, there's another devastating storm that's just swept through that area. But 15 years ago, you had the same news outlet, Yahoo News, on the same day, labeling the same thing very differently. If it was white people obtaining food in the wake of this disaster, they're finding it. If they're black, they're looting it. Again, it's the same thing. Not too long ago, there was a story out of Atlanta where somebody stopped breathing on a Delta flight, and this doctor, Dr. Fatima Cody, leapt into action and was almost prevented from delivering care by not one but two flight attendants. The first flight attendant asked if her medical license was real, and the second asked what she was doing in Detroit that day. So meanwhile, somebody's not breathing, and this is what happened. Now, I use this example because I've thought about it a ton, and I have an impossible time believing that those flight attendants in the heat of the moment, there's an emergency on an airplane, things are already real. I can't imagine that they're trying to make the situation worse, and yet they almost did. Luckily, nobody got hurt, and at least physically, because I remember Dr. Cody gave an interview that night where she said, I think one of the big issues here is that when a lot of people think of a physician, they're still thinking of an older white man. And for a lot of reasons, I don't look like that. So we'll end, come close to ending on this one. This is Ken Griffey Jr. He's from Cincinnati. His dad played for the Reds. He was drafted #1 out of Moeller High School in 1987 and went on to have one of the best careers in the history of our national pastime. He is inarguably one of the best players to play the game. He was inducted to the Baseball Hall of Fame a couple years ago with, at the time, the most votes ever, highest percentage. I think 2 people didn't vote for him. So cut to the last couple of years where he has crisscrossed the country in a custom tour bus that he drives himself to watch his kids play college sports. It's just him that goes. His wife doesn't like to go. And multiple times I have heard from him that he will be getting gas somewhere or getting food somewhere, and somebody will walk up to him and say, hey, do you think you could ask the owner if we could take a look around that bus? Ken Griffey Jr. Is probably worth $100 million. He can afford a whole fleet of these buses. Would people carry that same set of assumptions across a parking lot had he been white? And I think the answer is no. And a guy, I will say, last year made a strong point when I talked about this. He said, I think it's rare for anybody that owns one of those buses to do all that stuff himself. maybe people are just responding to the role, which I think is a valid point. But then we talked it out and we both decided that even if that was true, if he was white, we had a hard time thinking people would still ask to see the owner. We think they would just ask to see the bus. And incidentally, every time people ask Griffey, he says, it's my bus, and no, you cannot look around. So my goal on this stuff was not to try to bring a lot of doom and gloom into the situation. And for that reason, I'll try to offset it with the following. Some people will recognize these guys, others won't. They're probably in 3rd or 4th grade now. At the time, they're in 1st grade and they're best friends, and they made the news for 15 minutes because they got the same haircut to trick their teacher so she wouldn't be able to tell them apart. So, you know, it's about as good as it gets. Because at this, you know, I hear that from adults multiple times a week that they're colorblind. Incidentally, always white adults. I've not heard a single person of color in 5 years tell me they cannot see white people, just as an aside. These kids had no idea this was going to fall flat on its face. They had no idea. Think back to the color thing, the Stroop thing. They are colorblind. And I have this on here for this nice, you know, heartwarming, you know, moment. Hopefully this wasn't the thing that led them to realize that somehow they are different. But I have this on here because for the people that end up, let's say, caring about this stuff more in an hour than you did an hour and a half before when you started this thing, you're going to come up against the hurdle that I did early on and many times since, which is like, what possible dent could any individual, could any of us make in such a vast, vague, nebulous sometimes issue, such as implicit bias and its intersection in society. And to that, I'll just tell you this. I do a lot of stuff with little kids, a lot of workshops. And when I have little kids around this age, groups of them, I always ask them, what weighs more, all the elephants in the world or all the ants? And the little kids generally always say elephants, hands down. You weigh up all the ants in the world, they outweigh all the elephants about 1,000 to 1. It's not even close. We do not have an intuitive appreciation of how small things add up to big things, and how a lot of simple individual efforts, you know, done and collected and combined with all of us, these things can and do result in big, meaningful changes. So the goal of this today, of this talk this morning, is not to say you're not working hard, and it's not to say that you're not already trying your best. But my goal is to tell you that we need to work harder because we have to do better. So with that, I'll thank you for that part, and let's go to the next part. I don't know what to do now, but I'm sure it'll resolve itself in a second.
It should open up to the screen with all the panelists. Thank you so much, Ryan. That was very, very helpful information.
Okay. You sound biased.
Just a little bit. Well, and thank you for sharing all that information, because these are such important conversations, because many of us don't realize what those impacts are. I mean, even just watching what it was you were presenting, it all of a sudden flagged up some things that I may have done during the course of my life that I hadn't really thought about until I was watching the presentation going, okay, maybe that's why that happened, or maybe that's why I did that. And that's kind of the purpose of these types of conversations, is let's open up those conversations, both allow us to look introvertedly at ourselves and also start to talk to one another about things that are really happening that are impacting us.
Okay. Let me switch it back over there. Okay. So, is it my time?
So we've got this wonderful panel group on today. So basically what we thought we'd have a great opportunity of doing together is kind of talking about some of those things that we're seeing in the industry, implicit bias in terms of how it's either impacted us or how we've seen it impacting those that are in the field, and just start some of those conversations in terms of what's happening. Ryan, I know that you've spoken to a lot of realtors throughout the country and heard of different examples and different things that are happening. What are some of those stories that you've seen as well?
Well, sure. I'll say that, you know, the very first big event we did, almost like it was before the exhibit opened in 2017, this woman who at the time was the member of the diversity committee for the Cincinnati Area Board of Realtors, a great woman named Ellie Reiser. And she had read an article in the Cincinnati Enquirer that talked about the Implicit Bias Learning Lab about to open up at the Freedom Center. And she cold called me, and the first thing that I heard out of her mouth was realtors play an outsized role in perpetuating segregation in this country. And we want to learn how not to. And since then, we've done 4 continuing education events just with her group of various sizes. And I got to tell you, I mean, yeah, so I've done 2 weeks ago, I did this talk for a group out of Austin, a fledgling realtor group that was going to have me down in April in person, but obviously couldn't. And I've done it everywhere from Kentucky to New York. I'm supposed to do Vermont later this year, and I haven't done Vermont yet, but so far there's a heck of a lot of overlap in terms of, I guess, the issues that face all these groups. So I actually was really interested in maybe, you know, now that, because I know a few of the panelists were able to see a preview of that talk yesterday during our practice run, but now that people have seen it, you know, in its the whole thing, does anybody, you were saying, Kurt, like that you saw maybe ways in which that echoed in your own life. Does anybody else, and Kurt included, have any, like, did anything immediately jump out to you as relating to, you know, your professional life, your profession, or even your personal life, before we get too deep into, you know, me biasing you with all my questions?
Absolutely. I'll kick it off. And just as a quick side note, I did want to also introduce, I'm very proud that we have Tommy Trong on the line as well, broker associate and team leader with eXp Realty in Southborough, Mass. Tommy is the 2019 national president for ARIA, which is the Asian Real Estate Association America, and he also sits at NAR on the Multicultural Real Estate Leadership Advisory Group. So thank you so much for joining us, Tommy. I know how crazy schedules are, so we're glad we're able to grab you for this conversation. So I'll give you a perfect example. You know, this is something I don't think I've talked to a lot of realtors before. My legal name is Karenza Omer Thompson. Probably very few of you know that because I don't use it. I use Kurt, which is not my legal name, because for business, it was a necessity to make sure that it was easier for people to understand, pronounce, and didn't cause issues with potentially gaining access to different things. It was developed before I was in real estate, so I can't say it was specifically for real estate. But again, until I was watching your talk, Ryan, it was one of those things I hadn't really thought about. I'm like, yeah, I changed my name just to make sure that it was more palatable for those that I might want to do business where they may need access to.
Yeah, Kurt, I can resonate with that quite a bit. Looking back when my family came here to the United States, we're Vietnamese. The last name is Tram. My oldest brother, I'm the third youngest of 8, right? And so when my oldest brother Charlie went out to get a job, think about this. His Vietnamese name is Thien. His middle initial is Q, Q-U-O-C, and his last name is obviously Tram. He was very smart, much smarter than me, when he realized that after a couple of interviews to try to get a job, that he did not get a job, he came home and he changed his legal name. Think about this. He changed his name to Charles Aaron Harvard. That is still his legal name today. And you'd be surprised how many more doors open for Charlie now that his name is to Charles Aaron Harvard, right? He got more interviews, he got more jobs. When it came to our family leasing property for rent, it was Charlie's application that went in first with an American name, not the Trong last name. It was when we bought mortgages and we got houses and bought mortgages, it was Charlie's name that led the application rather than the Trong name. And so from our perspective, it was a reverse bias. We had to do whatever it took to get in the door. So I resonate with that, Kurt.
Absolutely. Thank you, Tom, for sharing that. I think that that's very common. Many times we do things that, in terms of discrimination and implicit bias, many times those that are in a diversity group, whether it's a minority classification, we still have a lot of gender issues with male, female. We still have a lot of challenges with our LGBT community and making sure that they have equal opportunity as well. There are a lot of mechanisms that many people have just automatically done to make sure that they have access or for protection that may not be verbalized or spoken about as much. So it's nice to be able to share those and kind of talk about those, because many times, like you said, it's that iceberg, but most of what's happening is well under the surface and we're not really talking about acknowledging or sharing. Other thoughts?
I was just going to say one thing real quick, which is I think also, I'll just say in my life, I have not had to, I've not had to go through what I just broadly call in my head calculus of like, this extra work. And I think it goes to the fact that because as a, straight, tallish white guy, I already, fit into a lot of people's buckets without having to do anything. And so consequently, that's the group that ends up being so oblivious to the idea that like the things that you guys, these lengths that you have to go to, that you have to go to them, because I've never had to do that. And so, it turns out that the only group on a consistent basis at the Freedom Center that would totally deny the concept of white and or male privilege were, guess who? White men. Because again, it's like the Truman Show. If you haven't had to change, you have very little appreciation. It's like the washing your hands thing. And so I think that it's useful to hear both sides of this stuff because there's a lot of people probably out there thinking, I haven't had to do anything. And it's useful, I think, and powerful to hear these examples of this things that other people have to go through just to get to, taken, as seriously as you should be on its face.
Absolutely.
Kurt, if I could share two things. One thing comes up frequently, and one thing just happened on Sunday evening. I had two of my siblings over with their spouses for a socially distanced barbecue. And one of my sister-in-laws, who's newish to the family, asked me why I don't play golf anymore. And as a child, I was likely the better golfer of everyone in the family. I have a brother who's a scratch now, so he probably would be well ahead of me. But having said that, I'm a 56-year-old gay male. And in the 70s, when you're coming out, the golf club, white, Catholic atmosphere wasn't likely where I wanted to hang or felt most comfortable. And that's usually when I think back on that, I think about that as one of the reasons why I don't play today. Now, I happen to end up getting married to somebody who hates golf, so it doesn't even come up as the let's go do this together thing. But the other piece that we hear all the time, and when I say we, Alan and I, we've been together for 29 years, and people will often ask us why we never had children. And Alan's comment, which I think is relatively fair and valid for us, is we were not the couple that were going to break the glass ceiling for adopting children, because there are gay couples who have been together as long as we have who may have adopted children 20-ish, 25 years ago. It was unusual. Most of them were having children with straight women on the side to have a family. But we didn't break that glass ceiling, nor did we desire. But it is one of probably, when we look back, one of our bigger regrets as a couple that we never took that and broke through that. But those are biases that we have, grown accustomed to as a couple and don't affect us long term. But when we think about it, we understand why we made those decisions. I hope that makes sense.
Thank you. There's just a lot of things that we do because of perception as well. Even just in real estate, and we've talked about this a little bit within this panel also. Sometimes we have to implement systems and processes to override that implicit bias because our natural inclination is not always the direct path to take. And many times I'll tell people, a perfect example. is you get a call from somebody on a Saturday night. One wants to see a property that's 150,000 in an urban area, and one wants to see a $1.5 million property in Concord or Lexington. How you react and how you're thinking about those two opportunities, even just right now, you're going to have a very different reaction to. And the ability to potentially discriminate or not provide equal service is very easy when we drive the direction that may be economic or in the highest and best business use of our time. So many things that we did is we understand that there are a lot of people that are having challenges with access to housing. Implicit bias is impacting in terms of when they call a realtor and how that realtor reacts. So trying to implement systems and processes to help us make sure that we engage each consumer the same way and give them equal housing was critical. And we worked on that very hard as a team. You know, the same product calls, requiring pre-approvals from everybody, not just the ones that we had questions on whether they would be financially qualified or not, to really try to override implicit bias. And I think that we could probably talk for hours about things that we're still seeing and things that are still happening due to implicit bias in the industry.
Yeah, do you see, I mean, like just, you know, in the course of my research for these, questions, it became clear to me that, the vast majority of these disparate outcomes that are in some of these reports and investigations obviously only come out after the fact when they're compared, to the treatment of other people, and it comes up as unequal. Along what you were just saying, Kurt, what are some of the things that, that we think that we might be able to try to do to, because the goal of all this stuff is that you got to find a way to make your implicit biases explicit, which you can do through, everything from taking some of these implicit association tests, which I will send out the link for, and other resources. It's through Harvard. But, analyzing surprise, again, is a very useful thing. If you've got it on an airplane, and you're strapping in and it's a female that comes across the intercom saying, I'm Captain Smith, and we're third in line for takeoff, enjoy the flight, and you're surprised, why? And you start to get a feel for where you've got these blind spots, which kind of leads me to my other question. A couple of you already touched on some of this, but have there been any other blind spots that any of you have become aware of personally or professionally or heard about that maybe used to be in your blind spot? Now you've got some perspective on it. Has anybody encountered any of those?
I can if you like. No, go ahead, Nellie.
Okay. So, Ryan, thank you so much for that presentation today. I went through like an emotional roller coaster as you were presenting.
I can't see anybody, so I'm just hoping that everybody's doing well.
So I appreciate that. As a Latina and a female, early in my industry, I was usually told, use the neutral colors, don't use the bright colors, don't use the bright lipstick, present a certain way. I don't have much of a strong accent, but I would speak a lot of Spanish with my clients. That's been my clientele, and I was kind of I don't like to use the word steered, but kind of told, like when you're in the office with these clients, you need to go to a separate space so people don't feel like you're talking about them. Like those things were always expressed to me. And I thought, well, maybe that's the culture in this office. Like to me, I wasn't quite understanding. As I got older and, went from broker to broker to a different broker, and the culture was a little different, and I was much more accepted. I understood then that, I was kind of being, what's the word I want to use? Smothered, like don't be yourself kind of thing. So I think that in the industry also, that's important when we bring in other cultures into our office, express to them that it is okay for them to be themselves. It is okay for them to bring the fish that they cook that may smell too much into their peer. They don't like the smell. That if for you to sit in an office and get into your mojo, you need to turn, I don't know, a little bit of music and it's your Spanish music, that it's okay as, that So those things to me at first were kind of, pushed on, like you can't do these things. And it really started with the attire, bring down the attire. So as you, did your presentation today, I realized too that I've missed the opportunity to voice, for example, I'd go show a property and my client would ask, could I park here? And the neighbor, they had a strong accent, the neighbor would say, speak English. I've missed an opportunity to approach that neighbor and say, here's my card. Why don't we have coffee? Why don't I have a conversation with you? Because I think that, like you said, when you were talking about the ants, these little things that we can do to kind of bring that attention to that neighbor of what you're doing as implicit bias, right? He may not be aware, he just couldn't understand. In my head, that's what I want to think, right? So there's a lot of missed opportunities that I think us as realtors need to realize, that we could take that extra step to, as little ants, collectively, make a change. And one last point I want to say is, we got to bring it, and I mention this a lot, we got to start at home with our children. If you have conversations with your children, you can see all the hope that there is in this country, because they will tell you from their heart how they feel. I had conversations with my 13-year-old and my 23-year-old about Black Lives Matter, and the response I got from them, I said, you know what? My village is really working, because what I mean with that is, it takes a lot of us to really give these children the influence they need to change what's going on. And hearing from them how they felt about this movement and what was going on really made me feel good, because I want to be honest with you guys, that was the first time I actually sat down and had that conversation. But by doing so, I realized that my village has been doing something. So I just wanted to share that with you guys. Thank you, Ryan.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nellie. Just to quickly dovetail on one thing that I think you mentioned that is so critically important. This is something that I hear periodically that just absolutely drives me nuts. You mentioned the language thing. I've heard a number of realtors over the years turn to me and say, yeah, can you give them a ring? I couldn't understand what they were saying. And it breaks my heart, because anytime that a consumer reaches out to us, they have a dream. They want to be a homeowner. They need access to housing or shelter over their head. And they're calling one of real estate professionals to help them with that. And many times all it requires us to do is slow down just a little bit, just an extra minute to listen. Or if we don't understand, ask a clarifying question. Is this what you said? Just want to make sure, and help that person in a way that many others may not. And I think that that's one of those opportunities we have as realtors and within our realtor family, as we're going through these changes and dialogues, is to become much more sensitive to some of those diversity challenges that not just our peers in the industry, but our clients and our customers in the industry are having when they're interacting with us as real estate professionals. We have the ability to do better, and we have the responsibility to do better in the coming months, weeks, and years as well.
So I think that kind of segues to another point. We can obviously go back to any of these, but I heard a couple weeks ago, like the week before the former, at the time, Washington Redskins, the week they ultimately announced their change, finally, I saw Bob Costas, the sportscaster, being interviewed, and they asked him, do you think the Redskins are finally going to, change the name? And he said, oh yeah, absolutely, no question. And he said, I don't know exactly why, but it's going to be one of two reasons. Either they've seen the light or they're feeling the heat. And that stuck with me. I don't know if he said it first, but it's a nice turn of phrase, and it dovetailed with, in my experience doing this kind of stuff with, a couple hundred different organizations at this point, from, tiny little schools to Fortune 500s. It is shocking how much overlap there is, and it boils down to one or maybe sometimes both of those motivations. What is your guys' feel for, why, is this the time for this stuff to be taken seriously? And do you hear, do you think people have either seen the light or are feeling the heat? What are you hearing from kind of the people in your your circles? Why
I
care?
think, sure.
Go ahead.
I think it's a combination at the end of the day, right? There's a lot of people who've been undertaking some serious self-evaluation that we have an obligation to educate ourselves, those around us, advocate for people who aren't in positions of power or leadership or need something, and always come to things from a place of curiosity. That was one of the themes that over the last few weeks at National Association of Realtors Leadership, it's been about coming to places from curiosity. But even Facebook, which, say what you want about it, it's sort of evolved, but sort of not evolved. And I mean that more from a kind of theoretical standpoint. Until they started feeling some pressure from some companies saying that they weren't going to continue to advertise, they didn't back down or take steps to actually put more information out there to help people be educated, especially since that's such a large source of information for folks. So I think that it comes down to, there are some people out there who get it, and there are other people that we'll have to pull them a little kicking and screaming and help them come to that sense of realization.
Yeah. I mean, that hand washing thing is obviously, I mean, that's, yes, it's morally and ethically the right thing to do, but that's a business thing, right? I mean, that's why you need more people in the room, is for that very reason, right? So that doesn't happen again. It's like the equivalent of, those flesh tone Band-Aids that were, around for 75 years that are exclusively pink. And if you are pink, you don't realize how absurd it would be to call something flesh tone on somebody who is, dark brown. So I think it's, are there any left-handed people out there? I'm sure there are. There's enough people. I always think that's one of the best examples. I'm right-handed, but I grew up in a family of lefties, and I call it right privilege. I guarantee you the lefties are made aware that they're different at least a couple times a week, versus as a right-handed, I had no idea how much of the world is built for right-handed people. It's just the world that I am. And so I think, this is all by way of saying I'm on board with any number of motivations that can get people to care about this stuff more. And hopefully, the net result is that maybe it's fake it till you make it, but at the end of the day, they'll care more, and it's the right thing to do. And, this is doing well by doing good, right? That's the responsibility.
Ryan,
Yes.
you mentioned the feeling. Oh, Teresa, did you want to go? Go.
Go ahead, David.
No, go, Teresa. Sorry.
No, I was just going to share, it's very moving, and I'm very privileged to be an MAR and be thankful to our leaders and all of you on this panel who are willing to have these conversations. I have a daughter who's almost 15. I got divorced from her father when she was 4 months old. She has been with me her entire life. And Nellie, speaking about, talking to your children, there's so much that we're influenced by that we don't even realize. So I watched Home Alone with Emma. She was 6 years old. And the famous scene where he's home alone and he's shaving and he puts on the aftershave and and he goes, "I'm the man of the house." Emma looked at me at 6 years old and said, "What's a man of the house?" She had no idea. And when she played with dolls, there was a house for the dad and a house for the mom, because she had no understanding that a dad and a mom lived together. And I think it's these little tiny things that we all grow up with that we frame our minds. And it's really these conversations that help us become more aware of our mind is just one tiny thing. There's thousands of millions of minds out there, and we all just need to understand each other. So sorry, David, to cut you off, but I just wanted to share that. I mean, we all grow up, with different experiences.
Yeah, 100%. I think one of the things that in you just sharing that, Teresa, and then the other comments that people have made, if we don't share our experiences and talk about them, we're not going to be able to confront the reality. Anyone who knows me well knows that I can have the conversation, be confrontational, and walk away from it and still love that person, even though we could vastly disagree. I mean, we could just disagree on 90% of the issues, but I can still love that person because of the other qualities that they have. And I don't think a lot of people are capable of that. And it always has me thinking about this, Ryan, is that are we doing enough confrontation with the biases? And I'll and I'm Kurt started it off with a couple of stories, so I keep thinking of all these stories in my life. I was just on a trip at the turn of the calendar year. Many of you know about it, and it was an absolutely fantastic trip. I traveled with 20 people. Of the 20 of us, there were probably about 4 or 5 of us, well, probably about a half a dozen of us that were not deeply religious. The other group was. They did prayer groups during the day. All great, love it. Be my guest. Do as you please with that. I share it because at one point, quickly tell the story, our luggage needed to be shipped to our homes. And one of the women said to me, oh, I can't, she said to the group, and they had just come out of the prayer study. So here I am, they come out of a prayer study, there's 14 people carrying their Bibles and coming out of their prayer study, and they turn to me and we're talking about shipping our luggage, and she goes, I can't have my luggage shipped. The home we bought has become a Black community. My head spun. It spun, and I went, so are you inferring that if your luggage gets delivered to your house, it's going to be stolen? And she goes, well, it's just not safe. And I said, you are kidding me. And I literally, Alan grabbed my arm, elbow for me to stop talking. And I said, I really think you might want to go back in there and reread some sections of that Bible. Because the idea that an educated professional, she's a dentist, would say something like that is stunning to me. That stuff is the confrontation piece that I think more of us need to do. Our industry, how many people of color are in the industry? Why aren't they in the industry? Are we putting up roadblocks for them? Are we making it? I don't know the answer, but why aren't there more?
That's great. I can share that my son, which is 6 years old, wanted to play with some girl toys or pink toys. I forget what it was. And my husband was going berserk because why does your son want to play with girl toys? And I said, well, our 23-year-old played with trucks when she was 6 and you weren't upset about that. So what I'm trying to say is I had to really educate him and say, our children at 6, to Teresa's point, they don't get pink is, for girls, trucks are just for, they want to play with that toy, and why not? So I bought the toy and my son has it. So at the end of the day, I feel that as parents, and to David's point, I could have easily avoided the argument and said, all right, and not bought the toy. But I went forward and got my son, the toy to prove a point that it's okay, so.
Thank you. Paul, I didn't know whether you might be on mute. Oh, and he'll be back. No, definitely thank you all for sharing. I mean, I think that this is good things can come from bad circumstances. And I think that what we're seeing right now is the opening of conversations, discussions, the sharing is the good that will come from some of the challenges that we're going through right now. I mean, we need to embrace sometimes when there is challenge or things that we don't want to hear, whether it's the news day. Oh, is that you, Paul?
Yeah. Can you hear me now?
We can hear you. Go ahead. Let me get you in the conversation.
There's a couple of things that I would like to share. First, Ryan's comment about left-handed people. Kathleen and I, my wife and I, are both right-handed. Both of our children are left-handed. And when our son, who's 42 now, was in 5th grade, 4th grade, he got a note was sent home to us that our son was incorrigible and that his handwriting was absolutely terrible and we needed to meet with the teacher and the principal. So we did. And the principal said, what are you going to do to help your son And we said, well, what's the problem? And the teacher said, well, his handwriting's atrocious. And we said, do you realize our son is left-handed? This was in the middle of the school year, and the teacher had no knowledge at all that our son was left-handed. None. Zip. And so the obvious is not always the obvious. And we had to be very proactive to correct that situation, unnecessarily so. You would think an educator would be able to look at his class, his students in his class, and make that decision. That's number one. Number two, in 1958, I traveled to Nashville, Tennessee. My brother was getting married, and we went into a Toddle House restaurant. 1958, and there was a black only and white only counter. And that is the first time I had encountered that. And it was shocking to me because I had seen discrimination on TV, but that's the first time I experienced it, and that has stayed with me. Third thing, I think because of my religious heritage is Jewish, and I was living in a community that was predominantly Christian, and got into an argument with a young child, my contemporary, who called me a dirty Jew, and I was absolutely horrified. And I told my mother about it, and she said, "What did you do?" And I said, "I walked away." And so my mother called the parent of that child and basically indicated in her own way that that was inappropriate behavior. And that child and I did not continue to interact with one another. I'll put it that way. The last thing, and we talked about this as a group yesterday, I had a buyer client in the town of Medway. I had a listing. The listing, I ended up showing the property to a consumer, not a client, and the consumer was interested in it. I prepared an offer for them. The offer got accepted by my clients, and the day of the home inspection, the sellers were leaving as the buyer consumer was showing up. The buyer consumer was a white Caucasian male and an African American woman. And after the home inspection was completed and we were going through the negotiations, my clients did absolutely everything they could to kill that transaction. It was very obvious to me. And I had a long discussion with them indicating my displeasure with how they were responding, and my belief that they were responding the manner in which they were because the couple was a biracial couple. I was very offended. The transaction did not stay together, and I left them as I ended the contract. I walked away. And the reason I'm sharing each one of these incidents is we, I think, as realtors in our profession, need to lead. And I give credit to Kurt and Teresa for organizing this program today, but we need to fight. We need to be proactive, professionally, but proactive. David McCarthy may not remember this, but several years ago, he was the president of the Greater Boston Association of Realtors, and I approached him and John Bilczewski to see what we could do to change the complexion, and I'm using that term intentionally, the complexion of the Greater Boston Association of Realtors. And we proactively talked about it, and we proactively met with people who were different from us. And that opened up a lot of doors for a lot of people. And the Greater Boston Association of Realtors is a different board today because of that one little effort, but it was a significant effort. And I think when we talk about 1% of our profession being persons of color, I disagree with that. I think 1% of the realtors may be persons of color, but there are a whole bunch of professionals, and I mean professionals, who've chosen not to become realtors, persons of color. And that I would hope that we could figure out a way to encourage more persons of color to be part of our association. I don't know how to do that. I'm willing to learn, and I'm willing to help that happen, but it's something that many of us have talked about, but I have not come up with a solution. Part of reaching out to Tom many years ago and Nellie to try and bring people together at MAR was that effort. But there's still many firms in the Boston area where they're successful, but they're not part of the realtor community. So thank you for allowing me to share those thoughts.
Thank you, Paul. I'd like to just add really quick on the left-right thing. It's amazing, how consistently the out-group, whatever it is, gets marginalized. The word sinister is Latin for left-handed, sinistra. The French word gauche, which we use for, tacky, is left. And ambidextrous literally translates into ambi, both, dextrous, right hand. You can use your right hand with both hands. So it's wild. To David's point about getting into confrontation with people, but leaving no worse for the wear, I think it falls under, for me, the idea that there's, as whatever cliche this sounds, there's more that unites us than divides us. And, people can keep that in mind. It's an important thing. The one more thing I want to add just really quick is to Teresa and the other people that are talking about, like, children. What's fascinating is I often would hear parents talking to me about the incredibly diverse environment that their kids were growing up in, that parents never dreamed of for themselves. And every time, the kids obviously never think of it as diverse. It's just their world. And so that slide that I had toward the end with the two little kids, that spurred a thing a year ago that I'm just going to tell you really quick, an anecdote. I think you should take heart, and this anecdote generally kills, we'll see right now, people over the age of 30, under the age of like 20, nobody laughs. So here we go. So this mom, this white family, this mom was saying that she was waiting in the car in the parking lot outside her kindergarten age son's school. And it was his class Christmas party. And as she's waiting for him to come out, she notices one of the black male teachers had dressed as Santa. So her son gets in the car and she says, "Hey, I noticed Santa Claus showed up for your guys' Christmas party." And her son said, "Yeah, but it wasn't the real Santa." And his mom said, "Oh yeah, how could you tell?" And he looked her in the eye and he said, "Because the real Santa Claus isn't that skinny." So, that's unreal. If you're an adult like that, there's no way it's not black, right? I almost fell on the floor when I heard that. And they're earnest. So I think, again, getting this stuff into as many kids as possible at as young of an age as possible, it won't be anything different. It'll just be what they know. And that's the key, is minimal mental effort to get to these jumps, because our brain doesn't like being uncomfortable. And it's uncomfortable when they're around things that we're not used to. So I'll segue back to you guys. These are great stories.
Oh, absolutely. And definitely thank you for sharing that, Ryan. I mean, I think you mentioned it well. You know, people can either make change because they're inspired to do so or their fear of reprisal of what's going to happen. Our hope is it will be more inspiration than fear, but there's a lot of things happening right now. So I think it's probably a little bit of both. This is just the beginning of conversations that we need to have to get progress move forward. I'm very pleased. For those of you that are on the call that didn't know, the panelists that are here today are all part of the Massachusetts Association of Realtors Diversity, Inclusion, and Member Engagement Task Force. Nellie Soto is our chair of that committee, and they're really tasked at making sure we have an incredible group of professionals from the industry and from around the state. And the goal of MAR is to make sure that we have a leadership, a volunteer base that is more reflective of both the populations we serve and of the realtors we serve. And we're in position to do a lot of great work there. Again, I mentioned it. NAR has said this is our lane. We have the ability to make change here. We have the responsibility to do it. And we have some of the best and brightest minds and the industry leaders that have the ability to be able to drive these types of initiatives. One of the things that I heard significantly in the early days of the challenges that we've had were people just wanting to talk. We got a lot of calls at MAR from realtors, many that I had never met or talked to and didn't know, that picked up the phone and just wanted to talk about something that had happened to them, something that they had seen, because they felt compelled to engage in this conversation around diversity and change. You know, the season of change. We're living at a very important moment in history right now where things will get better, progress will be made. And I can tell you, your realtor organization, whether it's your local real estate board, your state real estate board, your national association of realtors, or all of your institute societies and councils, are very much committed to leading and spearheading this change. And we also want to help engage with our members so that you know it's okay to have these conversations. The one thing I'll say before I kick it back over to the panel for more thoughts and ideas is, those of you that may not be of a diverse background, don't be afraid to engage conversations. You know, we all say things that we're like, oh, maybe I shouldn't have said it that way, or that may not have been politically correct, or, you know, is it okay to say that? It's okay. We need to have honest conversations about what we're feeling, things that we may have been exposed to as we're growing up that have informed and defined our implicit biases. Because without that acknowledgement, without that trusting environment of being able to have those conversations, we can't make meaningful change. It begins with getting to know each other. It begins with being in closer proximity to each other and just having open conversation and dialogue. So with that, I just definitely wanted to kick it over to the members of the panel for thoughts, final thoughts, and anything that they'd like to share with the listeners today.
I'll go. So, Paul, I want to thank you for standing up and for speaking with your client there about their maybe explicit unbiased. And I think as realtors, we are doing something. We are talking about it. We are educating, and we're bringing it to light. And I think that is the beginning of all growth, right? Of becoming better. By way of an example, it's hard to be confrontational. Especially if there's money on the line, right? I mean, I come into this all the time. It happened literally 2 days ago. 2 days ago, I helped my Vietnamese clients buy a property, a triple decker. I'm not going to name the town, but anyhow, we bought the triple decker, and immediately they put an ad out for rentals. And they did the first open house for rentals, and I just wanted to be there to help them get the right tenant in. And great applicants came in. And my Vietnamese clients basically says, you know what? Let's put it this way, they were discriminating solely based on color, all right? And I said, wait a minute, hold on now. Do you remember when your parents came here? They're my age, right? Do you remember when your parents came here? Do you remember what they had to go through to get their first property, to lease their first apartments, to buy the property? Why would you want to do that now? Let's really take a look at the merits of the application. Let's take a look at their jobs. Let's run their FICO score. Let's do everything by the books and make sure we look at it on paper. And it was a moment of truth for me. These are sort of new buyers. They're supposed to be multi-family property investors. And that was a point in time where I had to step up and I had to educate and take a risk on how that conversation was going to go. Luckily, it went well because they just needed to be reminded that they were there at one point in time. So realtors, we can do this. We can step out, we can lead by example, and we can have those tough conversations and educate. So thank you, MAR, for having me here. Thank you, everybody, for continuing to do the good work. And, you know, one day, hopefully, I don't know, maybe not my lifetime, I have to admit, I see color as well, right? And so that's the first point of reflection is we are all sort of unbiased, biased in our own way. And that's because that's the culture we live in. And yeah, work on our kids, right? I love that story about the Santa Claus story. He's too thin. I love that. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you, Tom.
I wanted to thank you all for today, but I also wanted to challenge our peers. If you see anything in our industry, whether it's with an appraiser, a loan officer, a peer, a customer, a client, that you have that conversation with empathy and you say, you know, this could go this way, but I know that maybe, and bring up the points, you know, and get that reaction. And with that reaction, say, I know you could change this. I know you could do better. It just point it out, because I promise you that after you point it out, they're going to realize, uh-oh, I was caught, or uh-oh, I did do something. So I just want to challenge our peers to really, when they're out there day to day, to approach, you know, because it's not only us realtors, right? We deal with loan officers all the time that, you know, we're like, uh-oh, or with an appraisal or appraiser that, and we've read those stories, right? That the appraisal doesn't come in, and then you get another one and it comes in, and you have to look at the facts, you know, and see why. But bottom line is challenge your peers, and I think we're pushing forward.
I too am grateful for having this opportunity today, and Ryan, for your presentation, to just remind us so many of those images that we saw, right? You can just see them in so many different ways, and making sure that you bring that to your forward consciousness, to be brave, admit when you don't know it, to make sure that you, to Nellie and Tom's point, help other people recognize when their consciousness isn't in the right location. And I think as kind of basic as this is, if we go back to our code of ethics and just remind ourselves that we have an obligation to every person, regardless of where they're coming from, their age, their race, their religion, where they live, what kind of a job they have, just come to everything from a place of goodness. And I think some of those images with those little boys, it was equal parts hurting my heart and equal parts filling my heart with joy. But just remembering that everybody comes to the table and we haven't walked in anybody's shoes, and we have to make sure that we put ourselves in their position so that we can help each other grow and be better. So I'm excited that we're here together, that we have this opportunity, and that we're all going to take steps forward together to remain curious and I think at that point of helping and educating. So thank you.
Yep. Thank you.
I would just add that I think first of all, I thank MAR under the leadership of Kurt and Teresa this year for bringing this stuff forward. It certainly was as a result of our climate, but you guys have stepped up big, and I appreciate that. I think we have a long way to go as a profession and as a society, and I look forward to being part of the solution, not the problem. And thank you, Ryan, for your information. I really like the two little kids with the same hair. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you to all the panelists and Ryan. I'm about to start crying. I don't know why. It's just been a great conversation, and I'm so looking forward to working together with everyone to do great things. Housing is so important. It is a basic necessity. And we are the purveyors of getting people into housing, and it's the biggest wealth builder. And it's so good for families and children to be in a home and rooted in a community. And I love this industry for that reason. And I'm loving it even more for us taking this time and this opportunity to make sure that we slow down and we do the work that we're charged with. So thank you all so much.
I would just like one more quote that I mentioned to you guys yesterday from 1992, William Clinton, better known as Bill, and he said, there's nothing wrong with America that cannot be cured by what is right with America. And I love that. I mean, I really think that. So now it's you guys. Go do it. I'll help.
Very well said. Paul.
You're on mute.
Thank you. I just, not to the panelists and not to Ryan, but to the people who are watching, you can make things better as an individual, as a realtor, in your community, in your neighborhood, in your family. And it's hard. I think our work that we have in front of us is hard work, but I think it could lead to a better community and a better nation. So I encourage you to do those little things and get out of your comfort zone. Challenge yourself, challenge your colleagues and your family. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you to all the panelists for being here today. I know we ran about 5 minutes over, so thank you to our audience for giving us a little bit of flexibility. Ryan, thank you so much for joining us and helping to lead this conversation on implicit bias. Very well done. And for those of you that are on the call, remember this is being recorded. You can share it, use it in office meetings, and come back and rewatch. And then just a reminder, the third part of our 3-part series will be next Thursday at 11 o'clock. We're going to have people coming in from the housing authorities to talk about Section 8 vouchers. And the reason why that's so important is when you look at the statistics there, if you're white and you're a non-voucher holder, 80% access to being able to see properties. Taking color out of it, if you're white and you have a Section 8 voucher, 12% access to being able to get in to see a property. So we think there needs to be a lot more awareness and understanding of that program as well. Thank you again, everyone, for being here on the call. Thank you for listening, and please, let's continue these very important conversations as we move forward. Thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thanks, guys.